Yes. Well, hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here today for my presentation on the Cane Ridge Revival. This is part of a competency course for my studies at Lexington Theological Seminary. So this is showing that trying to show that I am competent in the areas of interpreting the past and leading through faith. So I had to choose an event that is important to church history. I wanted to try and do something that was a little more specific to the disciples. I also invited the afternoon church that meets in our building as well, because they are from the Stone Campbell movement, but it looks like none of them showed up today. But thank you all for being here. After we are done today, I ask if you would please stick around to fill out a survey that we are going to be sending back to the seminary. That's for them to track metrics. I don't think it necessarily actually goes toward my grade. It just goes toward the dean seeing if they need to talk to me or not. So that's kind of my understanding of what's going on there.
So you want us to make sure you're not talked to? Or you are talked to?
Be as honest as you can with your. No, it's like, the way that it goes about it, it's like, hey, the honest feedback is what we are going to be able to use to grow and
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to. Your feedback probably won't get me kicked out. So.
Challenge accepted.
Oh.
After my mom has worked so hard to get you to where you're at.
Okay, a couple more people come on in. I'm just saying we are getting started with we're going to learn about the Cane Ridge Revival today. It is a moment in church history that I chose to talk about.
Our chair.
I was gonna say,
I'll sit over there with my coffee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just so everyone is
Thank
aware,
you,
I am
Fred.
recording this because I do have to submit this to my professor so they actually grade me. It is over there on the table. So that is where the camera is at, where the microphone's at. So those of you sitting closer will get heard more. So. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go back and look at the Cane Ridge Revival. This is probably one of the biggest. This is really could be pointed back to being the foundational moment of the Stone Campbell movement. I mean, this is several years before Stone and Campbell ever came together, but that Stone was the first one to really kind of get going in his work, and the events happening right after the Cane Ridge Revival does a lot of his foundational stuff. But we'll see about some of the events that led up to it that also lead to this. There we go. So before we start, we're going to do an introduction to one another. I mean, we all kind of know each other, but I think it'd be good to just make sure that we are introducing ourselves, speaking with one another. Hello, welcome. So great to have you with us.
Thank you.
So I invite us to go around and share your name, how long you've been a member of the faith community that you are currently part of, if you've ever heard of the Cane Ridge Revival before, and then just for fun, what your favorite ice cream flavor is, or if you don't like ice cream or can't eat ice cream, your favorite snack. So I'll go ahead and start, just kind of lead the message there. So my name is Matt Goodrich. I am the pastor here at First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Missoula. I have been with this congregation since 2015, first starting as a member and eventually moving to the unpaid associate to the paid minister. So that has been my progression with this faith community. I have definitely heard of the Cane Ridge Revival before, especially with my work with Cane Ridge West, which is Montana's Disciples Camp Facility, or Camp and Conference Center. And my favorite flavor of ice cream kind of changes, but the one I usually go to the most, just because it really grosses people out, is black licorice. So, but Big Dipper here in Missoula has the great black licorice ice cream. So do we have any volunteers who'd like to go next?
I'll do it.
Yeah.
Let's see. My name is Lori Akers-Aquis, and I'm married to this guy. We've been married 23 years.
23 years.
We've survived. He's still alive. I've been in the Stone Campbell movement since I was 4 years old. I've been all over the place, though. All three branches. Is that a good word? So I guess that's a long time. If I tell you how long it is, I'll just feel old. Let's see. I have heard of the Cane Ridge Revival since I was a little kid, yes. And my favorite flavor of ice cream, if I just like out in the open, would be vanilla because you can put anything in it. And you can change that flavor. Your turn.
My name is Robert Jaquist. I am an access technology specialist and an internationally published author in the field of tactile graphics. And we've been a member since 2018 here. I started out as a Methodist and a United Methodist and a Presbyterian, and and we got married in the Independent Christian Church.
We got married in the middle stream.
Oh, flavor of ice cream. Well, I like huckleberry when I can get it.
Oh, you're right.
And because the Baskin and Robbins usually has some no sugar added stuff. Hint, 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 you know. And that's about it. And I'm married to this beautiful lady on my left here.
Yeah, everybody has to pay him a quarter every time he says that.
Would you like to share next?
I'm Linda DeMink. And hi.
You got new glasses since I saw you last.
And what else do you want to know about me? How long you been with me? I've been a member of this church since, see, our oldest son was 5 and he's 50 something now. And I like ice cream, period.
Amen. Have you ever heard of the Cane Ridge Revival before?
I haven't.
Okay, right on.
I'm Debbie Bickerton. I've been a member of this church since I think 2019, maybe 2018. I don't remember exactly. Although I've been going to First Christian or Disciples of Christ churches off and on for about 20 years. And my grandparents were in this church since the 60s. So I have heard of Cane Ridge Revival because Matthew kind of talked about it a little bit a couple years ago, and I started that class. And my favorite ice cream is chocolate.
With that Mexican chocolate over the Big Dip was pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Just wanted you to know.
I still have the free ice cream cone coupon you gave me. You'll have to go get it.
I do too. Okay. My name is Katie Kostecki. I have been a part of this church community in Missoula for the past school year, so only a few months really. But I have grown up in the First Christian Church Disciples of Christ down in Hamilton. So I've been going there since I was a baby, so been a part of it my whole life. I have heard of the Cane Ridge West Revival because I've spent so much time up at Cane Ridge Revival, not Cane Ridge West Revival. Anyway, I've spent a lot of time up at Cane Ridge West, obviously, so I have heard of it through those areas. And my favorite ice cream is probably orange sherbet with chocolate, like the hard chocolate shell on it. That's my favorite.
Right on.
Yes, specific. Yes, I know what I like.
I'm Fred Lumsden. I've been here in Missoula since 2008, this church. With the disciples my entire life, and my father before me and his father before him. So yeah, we've heard a lot about the Cane Ridge Revival. And it was interesting to find a Cane Ridge West here. Because
That's was interesting to me too. Yeah.
the disciples are a lot scarcer out here in the West than they are in the Midwest.
Or even on the East Coast.
Yeah, because I came from Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri, and Arkansas are just full of little independent Christian churches. I don't get picky about my ice cream, but I'll take Rocky Road if they have it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Would you like to share?
I'm Jan Trump, and I've been with this church about 6 years. But I was baptized in the Christian church in Folsom when I was 12. We had to learn all this verses, and we all got a white Bible. And I still have that. And my favorite ice cream is the chocolate heat. It's really
Have
good.
you heard about the Cane Ridge Revival?
No, I hadn't.
Exciting.
Yeah.
I'm Tricia Waylet, and I grew up part of my life in California, so I went to a Southern Baptist church out there. We allowed dancing. And I was baptized when I was 12 in that church. Then when we went to Big Timber, I went to an Evangelical United Brethren, but they weren't as radical as what I've heard since. I don't know.
Didn't they merge, like the Methodists with the Methodists?
Yes.
Oh.
United Brother, that's how they come, that's how they call it, the United Methodist Church, yeah,
Oh.
sorry.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So, and I've been going to this church since the late 80s. And I know a little bit about the King Ridge revival because Matthew taught in the Sunday school this last fall and winter.
Hold on a second. You come to this church in the late 80s?
About 80, not 80 or 89. I was teaching with Harriet Bell down
So
there.
you've been about like 30 years at this church?
I'm sorry, what?
You've been here 30 years.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, 80s,
Yeah. Right.
What's about 30 years?
Yeah.
I would say almost
Mhm.
40.
It's been
But no,
a
because
while.
I graduated from high school in 1980, so that was 43 years ago.
Yeah.
And
So-
one more thing, when she was being in 88, 89, we was still there, our family.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And would you like to share with us? Today we're just doing introductions.
Ice cream and what
Yeah.
else to tolerate. But I
Yes.
also like that, those Mexican popsicles, and I brought them one time for the coffee hour. And as soon as people saw Mexico, they wouldn't touch the stuff. And I eat them all the time.
Don't drink the water, don't eat the popsicle.
Oh, their Coke is, they make their Coke with
Even your
absolute sugar.
daughter-in-law, her and her whole family wouldn't touch the Mexican popsicles. So you get them at Winco.
By the way, if you're ever driving past or through St. Regis, stop and get a Huckleberry milkshake.
Oh, yeah.
It is to die for. It is so good.
Yeah, Mr. Robert, that's about the first thing he says when we go towards Idaho. Just.
Oh, gosh.
He loves it.
And would you like to share? We're doing introductions. We're talking about our name, how long we've been part of our church. If you've ever heard of the Cane Ridge Revival and your favorite flavor of ice cream.
Oh, okay. Do you want to hear what they do before or just about this church?
Just this church is fine.
Well, about like here, maybe like second year, yeah.
Longer than that.
And I used to go to Russian Pentecostal, but they are very strict and very tough. Like no necklaces, no earrings, no rings, cover head and all hair back, and everything closed. And their rules is very strict, very strict. You can't really shake in hand of somebody's husband or talk to him because they think you like him or something. Well, I go to this church, I like this service a lot, and I like my favorite huckleberry ice cream. Street people here very nice. And don't mind that I'm using you wearing the necklace or like not judging because in Russian Pentecostal they judging a lot. If you're not following the rules, they start judging and run to pastor to tell him like you're wearing a necklace. Or if you with no cover, they will let him know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tattletales, huh?
I was raised in something very similar. I know exactly what you're saying.
Tattletales.
Well, there's.
Christians can be tattletales.
They can.
I grew up with a brother, I know.
What else you wanna know?
Well, that was pretty much what we're going for introductions. Just wanted to make sure we know each other, kind of keeping with our theme of today of building community together.
Are you gonna make some ice cream one day?
Probably, well,
You can have like a whole bunch of ice cream makers.
We've done that before, yeah.
it's been part of math.
Salt and cream, yeah.
I
There we go,
brought-
ice, yeah.
I brought ice cream. Ray loved ice cream. And so there's, it's not a big thing, but there's vanilla. It's in the freezer. We're trying to get Matt to take it. And
Well, I wanna let you know the very last
I
sentence.
mean, we're talking $7 ice cream. We're not talking cheap stuff. And there's some pink. I suppose that would be strawberry. wouldn't it?
Yeah, probably.
But that's called Killer and it's real small. I think it. But my grandmother, I'm partial to Wilcoxon ice cream because my grandmother separated the milk and the cream and sold it to the creamery in Big Timber.
Oh.
And Big Timber sold the cream to the Wilcoxon people in Livingston. So it's very good ice cream.
Yeah, it is.
Whoever gets out of here first, it's right in the freezer.
Now that you've said it, no.
Well, anyway, I like this service a lot, very much, enjoying it. I've been here like 2 years and I'm still enjoying the service.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, so before we move directly to the Cane Ridge Revival itself, I think it is important to give you some background on what was going on in the United States, like religious societies, and what was kind of just going on in the world, because that leads up to why the Cane Ridge Revival even existed. So this time period is kind of known as the Second Great Awakening of religion and faith in the United States. It's a major religious revival in the late 1700s into the early 1800s is what it's officially known as. So a lot at that time, there was noted to be a lot of religious apathy. And this, the world kind of goes through cycles of this, like, oh yes, we're all into faith and religion, and no, we're not really into it. Oh yes, oh no. So the US had been kind of really going through that apathy. A lot of ministers were trying to go out there and like stir up crowds. That's kind of where you start seeing a lot of revivals happening, which kind of brings in the Second Great Awakening, because then people were feeling struck by this. It's like, oh my gosh, the Lord is present today. And so that led to these revivals, which actually were also known as camp meetings. So they'd be kind of set in more of an outdoorsy place, because a lot of time the Western frontier, people moving out into the wilderness. They set up tents, they'd have people come and stand on stages and preach out to crowds of people and try and stir the spirit in them. And one of the most well-known ones, who actually will play a significant role in us getting to the Cane Ridge Revival, was someone named John McGreedy. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he was well known for stirring up people for revivals. And he had a big circuit. He went around, he preached at schools, in town squares, all over the place. Actually, in I think my study on just the general history of church, he was even mentioned in the revivalist time, just because of how significant his ability to stir the passion for faith in people was. And then important to us, because we are kind of focusing more in on the Stone Campbell movement aspect of things, is Barton Stone. He is one of the founding ministers of the Stone Campbell movement, so much so that his name is in the name of the Stone Campbell movement. So he was a Presbyterian minister. However, he did not set out to become a minister. He had no aspirations to go into ministry. He actually was at a Caldwell Academy, which was had a single instructor at it. They had several students, but at that he was studying to be a lawyer. He had plans to practice law. He had kind of grown up in church, but he had really struggled with some issues of faith. And then after McGreedy came and preached to the school, he kind of felt this idea that he needed to seek religion. It wasn't so much that he felt stirred himself saying, oh yes, I must go out right now. It's more like, I need to know more about this. I need to seek this. I need to have this moment of revival, of faith. And unfortunately, he did not experience that right away. It actually took several years, and it wasn't like an immediate thing. It was a bit of a transition that he experienced over time. He spent a lot of time asking questions to professors that they weren't always necessarily ready to answer. And at one point, he even decided he wasn't going to pursue ministry anymore, because he had switched from law to ministry. And he's like, no, I'm just not feeling this. I need to go do something else. And he was actually looking at becoming a teacher for a little while. But then he had a conversation with another revivalist, whose name was John something. It's escaping my mind right now, which is going to dock me, isn't it, Professor? So I believe it was Springer. John Springer was the name of the revivalist he talked to, and actually kind of reinstilled him. It's like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do this. And he went to pursue ordination and licensure in the Presbyterian churches. And so he actually did do that, but it took a little bit of time. He struggled a lot with some of the creeds and doctrine of the Presbyterian church, or even of any of the churches, especially when he had mingled with people who were part of the Methodist, who were Baptist. He had talked to these people and was learning about all of this stuff. And the one that he really struggled with, that's most noted for him struggling with, is the idea of Trinity, which most of us do struggle with, but there was a set doctrine that he had to kind of agree with and whatnot. And for anyone who has very deep faith, agreeing to something you don't believe is true about your faith can be very difficult. But eventually he did make it through and became ordained in the Presbyterian Church. He eventually moved to Kentucky, where he was the minister of Concord and Cane Ridge. So those had some meeting houses. The meeting houses could, especially at Cane Ridge, could hold about 100 or so people. Actually, it might be, I think it was actually slightly more than that. They had some upstairs space for slaves of the time, because this again, this was the Deep South, early 1800s. Let's see, that's the next slide. The one years. Oh, come on. There we go. So, what was happening in the 1800s? And this again, this is actually in 1800. In Logan County, there was a revival that was being led by John McCready, that person we had learned about a little bit earlier. Well, Stone went to this, and this is thought to be kind of one of the starting of these big camp revivalist movement. Was this John McCready led revival in Logan County. And the date is a little bit, they're not 100% certain. All the text I said it was either 1799 or 1800. They weren't certain. It might have been near the change of the end of the year. So it could have very well been, could have started in one year and ended in the other.
New Year's Eve celebration.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, because these revivals were not just one day. They would last for at least a lot of times for a week or so. So Stone attended this and he saw some inspiration by it. He saw inspiration, and there was a major inspiration for several ministers. This is again why they kind of think this might be the starting point of these revivals, because these ministers then went out and did their own revivals. They would have their own camp meetings and try to inspire people, stir up faith in others. And one thing that we are going to kind of go back into a little bit more in depth, but that was noticed at this that Stone observed and kind of got him thinking about going and doing his own revivals, was this idea of people falling. People being so struck by the Spirit that they would fall over like they were dead. So I was like, this was an interesting, and actually in his autobiography, he specifically talks about how this religious fervor and how he doesn't necessarily believe everyone needs to experience that. And he actually was I'm kind of getting ahead of myself there, but we'll come back to it. But in the terms of, he was a little like, I don't know if that's really God. And then he would hear people like confessing of sins and praying for forgiveness. It's like, actually, this probably is a God thing. So he kind of really started to take notice of that during the Logan County revival. But then also at his first kind of camp meeting revival, which was first done at Concord. So this one was led by Stone, and it was actually at that time, he had done this in early 1801, I believe June of 1801. He had the largest meeting in northern Kentucky to that date. There was 4,000 attendees. It was not just the Presbyterians either. He invited Methodists, he invited Baptists. Those were kind of the three big groups that were in the area, but everyone was invited to come to these meetings. It lasted several days, but then it kind of inspired him. It's like, okay, we're going to have another one at Cane Ridge. Cane Ridge was a little larger, had more stuff going on in the area. It's close to Lexington, well, relatively. I mean, these are close to each other because he was serving both of them, but there would be kind of more of a direct shuttle out there. And one thing I'll just throw in quickly about Barton Stone, just because I think this is kind of the funniest fact. After the Concord revival, he went down and met up with his wife. Then they got married and came back and did the Cane Ridge revival. So that was kind of the funny thing. But then the Cane Ridge revival. So this was in August of 1801. It took quite a lot of planning, organizing, getting people together to do this. Also while getting married and getting ready for this. But this was a major event that started drawing people, and it was going to begin on Friday night. Over the course of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the kind of counts were skewed because there were so many people, but they believe there was around 10 to 20,000 people at Cane Ridge during the time of this revival. And the revival lasted beyond Sunday. Now, a lot of people did have to leave on Sunday, but people were continuing to come to Cane Ridge up until Thursday of that week. And then around Thursday is the time the local area was depleted of extra stuff to give people, so they kind of had to start moving on. But if it hadn't been for that, this may have lasted longer. But the plan was they had around 18 Presbyterian ministers, as well as some other ministers or Baptists and Methodists present. They were all set up to preach different sermons. They had different things happening at all hours. Starting on Friday night, there was going to be the first communion service. They were inviting people to hear the worship. And because of how many people kept going, they had to start scattering people to stages around the area. The people who were coming in their caravans were having to move on to the neighboring plots of land by how busy this revival was getting. And this was getting that huge fervor of what had been happening at these other revivals. People were falling down. They had a designated area where people would pick them up let them go and recover, or sometimes they'd just be left to stay there until they came out of this fixation of falling, what they call it. It's like they on Sunday when they were doing the communion service, they had to keep shuffling people through the Cane Ridge meeting hall because there was not enough space to serve everyone. And it was true, they were serving everyone. They had the slaves and the slave owners coming in and having communion together. I mean, this was just a huge movement, and because it had people from the Methodists, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, this was a big ecumenical moment as well. A lot of times, especially back then, we don't quite notice it today because we have a lot of intermingling between our faith groups and whatnot. But back then it was a big deal. And it's like, no, you're Methodist, you're Presbyterian, you're Baptist. But you see this moment of like, no, we're all coming together to worship God, to feel the fire of our faith. And it stirred up, and then these people would go out. And the really cool part was that even after, when these people who had fallen over, they might actually be on the next slide. So when these people who had fallen over, like came out of their trance, which Stone likened to in his autobiography, they would go from having a dark, gloomy face full of fear and dealing with all this stuff, to a moment of light in their eyes and a smile on their lips, feeling it, this moment of peace coming over them as they come back to. And then these people who had fallen down would then start preaching alongside the ministers, telling people it's like how great God and Jesus are to accept the Spirit into their hearts. And there's not a specific idea of how many people had fallen. Their numbers are skewed anywhere from as low to 300 to as high as 3,000. The actual estimate that people have drawn from various sources say they believe it was around 1,000 people had fallen down throughout this course. Out of the 10 to 20,000 people, 1,000 of them had fallen and had been taken by the Spirit. Now, there are some other things that happened aside from falling. So known as the reactions to revival. There's also people who are known as barking. They would just be making sounds out of their voice, almost like they were like crying in anguish. People were dancing, which they wouldn't have been allowed in the church that you grew up in, but it's like, having this movement, they're singing out to the Lord, all these things that honestly, we do relate a lot of this stuff to church, maybe not necessarily calling it barking or falling, but people having these moments of like faith where they're called to fall down on their knees and pray to God. And one of the things that Stone relates in his autobiography is that, while he himself did not experience this, he thinks that this is a very important aspect for people who do experience it. It's not that we should diminish other people's way of coming to faith, but that we should each live into how God has called us. Which you can, let's see. Oh, okay, I did not make it. Next slide. So we're going to leave it at that. But thinking about all of this that had happened, this inspiration of this ecumenical time together, where they even though they had arguments over how they were going to do communion or do these various things, they still came together and worked on this moment to try and share faith with others, these 10 to 20,000 people who would then go and share their experiences. This was actually one of the largest revivals to happen during this movement, or this time, the Second Great Awakening. And it's like, this was also the point where Stone came to realize that, yeah, I'm still struggling with this doctrine, this creed. We shouldn't need to have this stuff to come together in faith. And that is where you can start to see him from this point on lead the Presbyterian Church. He and some other ministers got together and started the thing they called the Springfield Presbytery. Then after years wrote the thing called the Death of the Springfield Presbytery. And it was like kind of they're cutting ties with this idea of needing doctrine or creeds. Series getting involved in this. But it's like, but you can also kind of see in that moment how, when you think about the church that we are in today, if you think about having grown up in one of the streams of the Stone Campbell movement, you can see a lot of what happened here still kind of ringing true in how we interact with things today. We don't require people to follow doctrine or creed. We welcome people to come in and be part of what we're talking about, what we're preaching about. You can see how it's like some of Stone's like theology, which of course they developed, kind of made its way into the foundations of our church and still comes through today. Well, that's why we don't have that set hierarchy that comes down. It's not why I'm going to keep repeating myself here just because it's like kind of exciting thinking about all this stuff that had happened and that had still continues to affect us in the world today. So that is kind of like the big thing of the Cane Ridge revival. Now, Cane Ridge does still exist today. It is actually it's listed as a shrine, on maps it's still in Cane Ridge, Kentucky, it's by Bourbon County. It actually has a building over the current structure. It's still there. You can go in and tour it, but you can kind of see the ladder where slaves had to go up into the balcony area. Actually, I was hearing, there was this conversation I had while I was at my anti-racism co-reconciliation team meeting, a member of the church. We grew up in the Black churches of the disciples of the Stone Campbell movement, and she said they had an experience where they climbed up there and sat where their ancestors sat to talk about this. It's still feeling the spirit and this movement of this place. And even though we don't necessarily hold places to be like, shrines and whatnot, even though it's listed in the shrine, you can still feel the echoes of this great movement, this revival spirit of faith.
Maybe it's one of the thin places.
So that's thinking about us going forward and what this can teach us, and that, this idea of being able to come together in community, this idea of being able to be part of something greater without having to follow these strict things and go against what might not make us, or what might make us feel uncomfortable in our faith. Like, we don't have to do that. We can be one. We can be that body of Christ. So that's our roots. That is where we come from, and that is where we are going to continue to share that with people, to share that we are Christians, we love people, and that's we love people. We're not, it's not like one of those, yeah.
We do.
Yeah. That's like, we're people.
Long road we Campbell place.
He was later, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, so Campbell was, yeah.
Yeah.
So Campbell was up over in Virginia. And he was actually a
Pennsylvania first.
Yeah, Pennsylvania, Virginia areas. Yeah. Both he and his father.
They were in the Great West.
Yeah, so they had moved from Scotland, and they were both Presbyterian ministers as well. So our roots, our founders were all Presbyterian ministers who decided they didn't want to follow doctrinal.
They didn't like, Alexander Campbell and his father, I can't remember his name, Thomas. Okay, they didn't like that you had to have a coin or meet a certain requirement to take communion.
Right.
And so the father was over here, and Alexander was in Scotland, and they came here, and they both were really nervous about that they both come to the same conclusion at the same time. And so they somehow that got together because it was an ecumenical movement as well.
Maybe they were at the revival.
Yes.
So what happened was about 1811, they both kind of met up in a meeting. It took a couple of years until they met up a couple of years before, and then in 1811 they kind of said, no, well, we can be one movement. And there was always disagreement on things, because the Stonians, as they kind of would call themselves, we were Christians. Those with the Campbellites were disciples.
Yeah.
And so eventually came together the Christian Church Disciples of Christ for what is kind of like the center stream. I mean, in terms of we're kind of on one side, but we are like the main branch that has come up from the Stone Campbell movement.
Yeah.
But
Fascinating.
Does anyone have any other questions about the Cane Ridge Revival or even the Stone Campbell movement? We can go to that, but it's kind of building a foundation for where I would like to go with some further faith formation stuff. Talk about, hey, look at where we've come from. Look at our history, because even though we don't have that doctrine of you have to follow what has been said before, we can still learn a lot from our founders and why we do things the way we do them today.
Well, you mentioned the date of 1811, and right at the end of 1811 was the new Madrid earthquake, which shook the whole eastern part of the United States. Church bells rang in Boston because of there was so much earthquake activity, and there were tremendous aftershocks, and buildings fell down 4 months later due to aftershocks. There were sand fissures opened up, and big piles of sand blew out, and like the Mississippi River reversed course for a while, and tremendous amounts of activity. And I would personally, I would have thought this would have really, if your cabin falls down, I'm thinking it might make you kind of wake up, pay attention.
I start thinking there's something bigger than you around.
Right.
So yeah, so if you're interested in further reading or further looking into things, we do have one of the copies we have here is the biography of Barton Stone. I'll be putting it back on the shelf later this week. And then I also have there's some digital copies out there of the autobiography of Barton Stone. And then I also have an encyclopedia of the Stone Campbell movement, which you can learn almost anything you want to know
Oh, absolutely.
about the Stone Campbell movement through that. So I highly encourage you to look into that. Again, I'm hoping to do some more items like this, even though it won't be for a grade, but just to kind of build on some more of that foundation of who are we as the Christian Church, disciples of Christ, as believers, as people who love people.
Yeah, what's the difference between First Christian Church and Christ?
So that is just the name
That's
that
the
we
same
went by.
thing,
So
yeah.
this church
There
actually
is
used to be.
a difference. The independent Christian churches and the Churches of Christ don't have anybody over them. Here still, you hire your own minister, but there's still a branch of people to work with or answer to, or who might help if you get broke or, stuff like that. So that's the difference, is the headship. The independent church doesn't, they can hire whoever they want, do whatever they want, and although they would like to control every other congregation, both of those, they don't. But so that's the difference. Sorry.
No,
Apologize.
Well, the independent church does have some kind of,
Well, they are kind of tied together through their universities and colleges, preacher schools.
But not all disciples of Christ churches are First Christian. A lot of them are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I found in moving around, a lot of times they are, but like Billings now just has Central Christian. But it's a disciples of Christ
yeah.
church.
And this First Christian.
we're called First Christian because we are the one disciples of Christ church here in town. So we're the,
That's the if you go to a town, you see First, you're probably gonna assume.
Yeah,
it's
because
Christ.
the 4 or 5 places I've lived. There were 2 places that didn't have a First Christian, but when you looked up disciples of Christ, there was one in town. It was just under a different name.
Yeah, and actually, this church only became First Christian Church in 1959. We were, oh gosh, what was it? I just wrote this on our website.
Let me guess, Presbyterian?
No.
Okay.
It was a Church of Christ.
Yeah, I think we were called like the Church in Missoula or something like that, Church of Christ in Missoula.
Well, there's like a ton of restoration movement congregations in this town. And the saddest part of all that is what we could do together. But here, we have this little group meeting here and this little group meeting here. It's just horrible. Because people argue and they, it's just the nature of the beast, I guess.
Yeah,
nice
that
thing-
human nature, yeah.
The nice thing is we do have a good relationship with the Five Valley
Yeah,
Community
yeah,
here.
that's-
Their minister Ed and I chat every
Yeah.
now and then. We actually go to lunch every now.
Yeah.
Some positive movements and maybe
Yeah.
the movement for unity that split.
There was, when I was still going to church in Hamilton, when I was in high school, there was a bunch of churches that got together and we did like hot meals over the summer when families, like kids specifically, couldn't get meals from schools and stuff like that. We would prep meals and people could come. We did it like every Tuesday and Thursday or something like that. Or I think there were different days. That's when our church helped volunteer for it. But there was a bunch of churches all helping. And I remember, so there is a little bit of community, even though, because we can all agree on hot meal,
Yeah.
So it was, or you would think, right? Yeah, exactly.
Well.
When you get down to spending money, the problem comes in.
Right, yeah, that's
We
true.
probably have more in common than we have apart, but a lot of times people just decide that that's their thing. They're wedded to their
Yes.
Yeah.
interpretation. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway.
Which I mean, kind of comes back to that idea. It's like, why after the revival, it's like, well, we were like all this, but like, look at this, we were able to come together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, I mean, it's like, even though that happened over 200 years ago, we're still dealing with the same issues.
Yes, exactly.
Today.
Yeah, well,
Yes. Okay, well, I would like to thank you all for coming today. I would ask that you please fill out the survey. We're supposed to turn in at least 7 of them, so I think everyone who's.
I'll do
listening
3.
currently-
Okay.
No, but everyone who's currently in.
you'll have to go grab some of those people
Yeah.
back.
So I am supposed to step out of the room while y'all do it, because I'm not supposed to do it, and then I was gonna ask Katie if you'd be willing to put them in the envelope.
I can do that.
And then I will make sure it gets to the mail because we couldn't get don't know what the postage is actually going to be. It said you
Yeah.
need to have the postage paid for. It's like, I don't know how to use this thing. There's pens here. I'm gonna stop the recording so that way y'all can do that.